Sion scratched his head, a gesture of distraction as he declared himself the bait. Behind him, Rachel carefully applied makeup, her movements precise. She stood poised in a crisp white blouse tucked neatly into a pencil skirt, her legs covered in sleek black tights. As Sion reasoned that Noel's goal was to capture him, he suggested that making himself an easy target was the quickest way to lure Noel in. Glancing at Rachel from the corner of his eye, he noticed her attire and asked where she was heading and why she was dressed so formally. Rachel, uncapping a tube of vivid red lipstick, replied without looking at him. As she applied the bold color, she explained that she couldn't just sit idly by while he acted as bait. Her tone was sharp but resolute. Sion was an asset to Dead Mansion, and she intended to ensure every possible resource would be used to protect him. She finished applying the lipstick and met Sion's gaze in the mirror, asking him what his true objective was in the operation. Sion, caught off guard, hesitated before responding that the goal was to capture Noel. Rachel turned to face him directly, her voice cool and even as she corrected him. She reminded Sion of a truth he already knew. He was no longer like the other children controlled by the three principals. No one gave him orders or dictated his actions anymore. Her words struck a chord, and Sion's expression shifted to one of serious contemplation as she pressed him again, asking why he truly wanted to fight Noel. Finishing with her lipstick, Rachel stepped away from the mirror, her gaze steady as she questioned whether Sion still clung to the illusion that Hyunho's mother was his parent. The question visibly unsettled him. He clutched his sports bag tightly, muttering that he didn't know. Rachel's persistence grew sharper, urging him not to dismiss the subject so lightly. But Sion slung the bag over his shoulder and turned, his voice tinged with sadness as he admitted he truly didn't know. His thoughts drifted back to the memory of being abandoned by his real mother, a blurry recollection he couldn't fully grasp. He confessed to Rachel that he could barely recall the details of his fight with Noel, even though it hadn't been long ago. His head and body ached just thinking about it. He remembered grabbing the jagged edge of a broken katana with his bare hand, the pain vivid, but his memory clouded. Rachel studied him closely, her skepticism sharpening. If he truly couldn't remember, it meant he hadn't been consciously using his powers during the fight, a fact that surprised even her. As he began walking away, Sion admitted that even though the three principles were no longer imprinted on him, he still hadn't mastered his power. Rachel's frustration bubbled over, her voice exasperated as she argued that this was all the more reason to avoid unnecessary risks. She demanded to know why he was so insistent on being the bait. Sion paused, his gaze distant as memories of Hyunho on crutches flashed in his mind. Apologizing to him in the past resurfaced vividly. Though they weren't family, and not even true friends, he made it clear that if he could choose freely, with no rules or principles binding him, his choice would remain steadfast. Anyone who dared to harm Hyunho's family would pay the price. Standing tall, his eyes filled with unshakable determination, Sion looked back at Rachel. He made it clear this decision wasn't born of obligation or external influence. It was his choice, and his alone. Rachel narrowed her eyes, her expression unreadable, but her silence spoke volumes as Sion's unwavering resolve hung heavy in the air between them. Jang Yun's boot hovered mere centimeters from Sion's face, the air humming with tension as Sion's thoughts crystallized. If Noel wanted bait, he would provide it willingly. The kick landed with devastating force, sending Sion hurtling backward. His body skidded across the polished classroom floor, the impact reverberating through the room. With a controlled twist, Sion halted himself mid-slide, his shoes squeaking as they gripped the floor. Jang Yun stood poised, one leg still raised, his gaze gleaming with a mix of amusement and challenge. Sion straightened, brushing off the dust as his lips curved into a smile that matched Jang Yun's icy expression. Beneath the facade, a mutual understanding passed between them. This was no mere scuffle. It was a test of strength and a dance of intent. Sion's mind sharpened, daring them to take the bait. He was no prey. He was the hunter. Outside the classroom, The three bullies Sion had dispatched earlier trudged toward the scene. Two leaned heavily on each other, their injuries slowing their steps, while the leader rubbed his reddened jaw, muttering curses under his breath. Their arrival was abruptly interrupted by the classroom door exploding off its hinges, slamming into the lead bully with bone-rattling force. He crumpled to the floor beneath the door's weight, coughing in pain. The cause of the chaos became clear as Jang Yun's kick launched Sion through the doorway, sending him crashing into the hallway. Yet, the force of the kick wasn't enough to overpower Sion. With one hand gripping Jang Yun's boot, he had absorbed the attack and retaliated in a single motion. Sion's other hand clamped around Jang Yun's calf like a vice, and with a roar of effort, he hurled Jang Yun toward the classroom's window. Glass shattered as Jang Yun collided with the frame. His reflexes saved him from plummeting outside. He grasped the jagged window ledge at the last second, his body half dangling as shards of glass sparkled in the sunlight. Jang Yun hoisted himself back into the room with feline agility, landing in a crouch. His grin widened, unshaken by the violence of the throw. There was admiration laced with menace in his voice as he acknowledged Sion's improvement. Without hesitation, Jang Yun vaulted toward the hallway, sliding into the nearby bathroom with calculated speed. A metallic click echoed through the tiled walls, drawing Jang Yun's attention. Sion stood by the door, locking it with deliberate finality. His voice carried a quiet conviction as he observed that Jang Yun had walked straight into a trap. While Sion had anticipated an ambush, he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly, on their very first day back. The hallway buzzed with murmurs as students gathered to witness the aftermath of the clash. They watched with wide eyes as the two remaining bullies struggled to lift the door off their unconscious leader. The crowd speculated in hushed tones, some remarking they had passed by only minutes earlier and missed the battle. The tension grew as more onlookers gathered, whispers intensifying with every retelling of the fight. Their chatter was interrupted by the sharp voice of an authoritative figure. Rachel, clad in a pristine white lab coat and posing as a teacher, strode purposefully into the hallway. Her presence immediately silenced the students as she demanded to know the source of the commotion. One brave student explained, pointing toward the bathroom, that Sion and another boy had been fighting and had run off together. Rachel's sharp gaze flicked to the closed bathroom door. Masking her concern, she dismissed the students with a wave, instructing them to return to their classrooms. The crowd reluctantly dispersed, casting lingering glances at the scene as Rachel approached the bathroom with measured steps. Behind the locked door, the sound of confrontation stirred, and Rachel prepared herself for what lay beyond. Jang Yun lunged at Sion with fluid precision, his wry smile betraying his amusement. His knee rose with startling speed, slamming into Sion's face with enough force to send a shockwave through the room. Sion reeled back, but recovered almost instantly, retorting with a powerful punch to Jang Yun's gut. The impact sent a resounding crack through the air, yet Jang Yun merely grinned, his words dripping with mockery. Sion seized Jang Yun by the collar of his shirt and with a feral growl swung him into the row of sinks. The porcelain shattered on impact, shards scattering across the tiles as Jang Yun landed upside down, debris surrounding him. Sion loomed over him, his tone cutting as he demanded to know Noel's whereabouts. Jang Yun, undeterred, lashed out with an upkick, his boot connecting sharply with Sion's chin. The force snapped Sion's head back, leaving a dusty shoe print behind. Yet, despite the hit, Sion steadied himself, his glare unwavering as he questioned whether Jang Yun still wanted to fight. Jang Yun launched himself off the ground with an almost predatory grace, his body coiled and ready to strike. Sion braced himself, his fists raised, but Jang Yun deftly slipped past Sion's punch, grabbing his outstretched arm. Sliding across the floor with practiced momentum, Jang Yun planted both feet into Sion's chest with a powerful dropkick. The impact was thunderous, sending Sion flying backward through a toilet stall. Wood splintered and tiles cracked as Sion crashed into the space, his body momentarily stunned. Jang Yun followed, stepping into the wrecked stall with a dark chuckle. His voice carried a sinister amusement as he remarked on Noel's order to keep Sion alive. though he hinted that such restraint might not last if Sion continued to resist. But as he leaned closer, mid-sentence, a sharp whistle cut through the air. An object grazed his cheek, leaving a deep cut that began to bleed immediately. Sion crouched in the wreckage, gripping a broken mop handle. The wooden shaft, capped with a jagged metal end, gleamed under the flickering bathroom light. His expression had darkened, his eyes alight with an unsettling malice. Jung-Yun blinked, momentarily taken aback. This wasn't the same Sion he had been toying with moments ago. Sion lunged, the mop handle slicing through the air with a whistle of lethal intent. Jung-Yun dodged the first strike, his movements agile as he pushed the weapon aside and leapt backward. Sion didn't relent. With a primal shout, he swung the handle downward in a crushing arc, the force so immense that the impact shattered several floor tiles. Jung-Yun barely avoided the blow, retreating further as Sion pressed the assault, his strikes relentless and precise. Bracing one foot against the wall, Jung-Yun propelled himself forward, his fist aimed to end the fight with a single blow. The punch landed squarely against Sion's side, eliciting a grunt of pain. Yet, Sion barely faltered, his expression veiled by a dark shadow, his eyes gleaming with malice as he raised the mop handle again. Their clash was interrupted by a sharp voice echoing from outside the bathroom, demanding the door be opened immediately. Jung-Hyun's demeanor shifted in an instant, the malice in his expression replaced with a light-hearted smirk. He remarked casually about the noise, suggesting they postpone their fight. Sion, however, was far from done. Swinging again, he growled that Jung-Yun wouldn't escape. Jung-Yun ducked under the strike, his movements almost playful as he grabbed Sion's head and arm in a firm grip. Jung-Yun's gaze darted to the bathroom window. With a mischievous glint in his eye, he vaulted through the shattered pane, dragging Sion with him. Glass shards rained down as they plummeted from the second floor. The wind whipped around them, the ground rushing closer. Jung-Yun glanced at Sion mid-fall, his tone mocking as he questioned whether the landing would hurt. Sion, his expression calm despite the peril, replied flatly that it would hurt. A lot. Tightening his grip on the mop handle, Sion twisted mid-air. With a mighty swing, he drove the metal-capped end into the side of the building. The sharp screech of metal against concrete echoed as the handle embedded itself into the wall, dragging along the building's surface to slow their momentum. Sparks flew as the improvised brake fought against gravity, and Sion clenched his teeth, determined to control the descent. The impact sent both boys crashing to the ground, creating a large dust cloud as debris scattered in all directions. Their bodies struggled to rise amidst the wreckage, but it was Sion who stood first. His figure emerged from the haze, his clothes dusty and torn, and the shattered remains of the wooden mop handle dangled loosely in his grip. His expression was dark, his gaze sharp with murderous intent. Jung-Yun remained on the ground, his thigh pierced by the embedded handle of the broken mop. Blood seeped through the fabric of his pants, pooling beneath him. Despite the pain, laughter escaped him, his amusement evident even as he clutched the injury. The wound was inspected briefly by Jung-Yun himself, his demeanor almost taunting as though daring the conflict to escalate further. The moment was interrupted by a sharp voice that called out to them, cutting through the dust and tension. The attention of both boys was drawn to Rachel, who approached with an air of authority. Disguised as a teacher, she strode toward the scene, her stern tone commanding their focus. As the distance closed, her demeanor shifted, concern feigned as her eyes darted between the injured boys and the destruction around them. Sion's hand moved to his head, frustration evident in the way his fingers pressed against his scalp. His body, once again driven by uncontrollable instinct, had acted without deliberate thought, a realization that visibly angered him. Meanwhile, Jung-Yun had begun brushing off the dust from his clothes, his movements hurried and futile, as though trying to mask the disheveled state he was in. As Rachel drew closer, the wound in Jung-Yun's thigh was noticed. A request was made for him to hold still, her tone laced with false concern as the injury was examined. The offer of help was met with reluctant acceptance as Jang Hyun extended his hand for support. A syringe was slipped from her pocket unnoticed, and the needle was swiftly injected into his arm. The injection was felt briefly by Jang Hyun, but its significance wasn't realized until the pinprick was examined, confusion crossing his face as the substance took effect. An explanation about its purpose, a supposed anesthetic, was offered, but it was heard faintly as his consciousness faded. His body slackened, and before he could collapse entirely, he was caught by Rachel's steady hands. The concern in Rachel's expression disappeared as her true emotions surfaced. The gleam in her eyes turned predatory, and her smile stretched wide, grotesque in its intensity. The unconscious Jang Hyun was regarded with satisfaction as she muttered something quietly, her words filled with mockery and triumph. His body was shifted slightly in her grip as plans for interrogation were contemplated, her excitement at the capture barely contained. Jang Hyun's unconscious form appeared almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the sinister atmosphere that now surrounded him. The sound of Rachel's laughter filled the air, her victorious tone underlining the conclusion of the confrontation. The scene was left behind as she prepared to act on the opportunity presented by Jang Hyun's subdued state. The director stood before the vast nave of his church, his gaze sweeping across the empty rows of benches. The quiet expanse seemed to echo his thoughts, heavy with a grim understanding. Across the world, abandoned and neglected children existed in every corner, their lives discarded as though they were nothing more than debris. A bitter truth settled within him. These children were resources, raw materials to be molded into ultimate weapons. His hands clasped together in mock prayer, but the opulence of his bejeweled teeth glinted in the dim light, betraying his satisfaction. The smile that curled his lips reflected no reverence, only ambition. He reflected on the facade of benevolence they presented to the world. Through the Dead Mansion's so-called Good Children project, they placed those children into adoption with wealthy, desperate parents who needed them for appearances or fulfillment. The process was simple, clean, and profoundly manipulative. The image of those children floated in his mind, hollow-eyed, their bodies lean and rigid from the rigorous training they endured. Many sat in tattered vests, their spirits stripped bare to become what they were demanded to be. He acknowledged, almost detachedly, that Dead Mansion hadn't invented this idea. It was an old, unoriginal concept. Wherever one looked in the world, material was abundant. Unwanted children, taken in and forged into emotional monstrosities, brutalized until they were weapons in the hands of their masters. As he savored the thought, a man stepped forward from the shadows, his presence commanding. A heavy red coat hung over his shoulders, the color stark against the muted tones of the nave. Behind him, row upon row of children stood silently, their postures disciplined, their faces void of innocence. The sight was haunting, a silent army of lives stolen, reshaped into instruments of control. The director's smile widened as the weight of their potential settled heavily in the sacred air. Rachel, still clad in her teacher's disguise, leaned back on the infirmary chair with a casual air, her sharp eyes resting on Sion. She speculated aloud, suggesting that Jang Hyun might hail from Korea's version of Dead Mansion. Sion, leaning against a nearby desk, glanced over to where Jang Hyun lay unconscious on the infirmary bed. The thought clearly troubled him, his brow furrowing as he mused on the possibility. If that were true, it would make Jang Hyun one of them. Rachel, standing now, affirmed his suspicion with a nod and brushed the matter aside as her domain, urging Sion to leave the rest to her. Her tone carried an air of finality, and she reminded Sion of his decision to return to school. She ushered him out into the hallway with a firm but gentle push, dismissing his protests as she assured him she would handle things. As the sliding door clicked shut behind him, locking with an audible snap, Sion hesitated, his mind turning back to Jang Hyun. He pleaded softly for Rachel not to be too harsh with him before finally walking away, his steps echoing in the empty hall. Inside the infirmary, the atmosphere shifted. Jang Hyun's eyelids fluttered open faintly, the haze of unconsciousness lifting just enough for him to perceive his surroundings. The sound of scissors snipping broke the silence, crisp and rhythmic. Strands of hair fell in slow arcs to the floor, gathering in a small circle near a sturdy boot. The memory bled into his mind. That sound, the cold, detached rhythm, the metallic glint of the scissors. A younger Jang-Yun sat rigid on a worn stool in a dimly lit room. Before him stood a man wearing a combat bomber jacket, his dreadlocks framing a face that shifted between kindness and something darker. The man, known as Carpenter, worked methodically, trimming Jang-Yun's hair with practiced precision. His voice, light-hearted yet edged with underlying menace, broke through the snipping. He teased Jang-Yun about staying still, warning in jest that a slip could leave scars on his head. The man's tone was disarming, even as his words carried a weight that pressed heavily on Jang-Yun's small shoulders. Carpenter's demeanor shifted as Jang-Yun, his young face lighting up with admiration, asked if he could have the same haircut as him. Jang-Yun's wide-eyed enthusiasm was met with a laugh, Carpenter declaring that Jang-Yun had a sense for aesthetics. He added with an unsettling cheer that such an artistic touch might even raise Jang-Yun's value, a line he would personally note on the boy's adoption certificate. Yet, when Jang-Yun pressed further, insisting that a cooler haircut would fetch a better price, Carpenter's smile faltered. His large hands rested on Jang-Yun's thin shoulders, and his tone shifted from playful to something colder, sharper. Carpenter leaned in close, his gaze locking onto Jang-Yun's. His words fell heavy, instructing the boy that he wasn't Carpenter, he was Jang-Yun. Everything about him, from his appearance to his strength, must be uniquely his. The intensity in Carpenter's voice grew, every word biting deeper as he declared that family was a weakness, a shackle that would only make him fragile. Jang-Yun, young and impressionable, looked up at the man with wide, innocent eyes. Carpenter's expression twisted, his tongue flicking out in an almost feral display as his face hovered closer. His voice turned hard, venomous, demanding if Jang-Yun truly understood what was being said. Jang-Yun's breath hitched, the overwhelming presence of the man searing the words into his mind. The memory dissolved as quickly as it had surfaced, the room spinning back into focus. On the infirmary bed, his hands clenched instinctively, his body reacting to the lingering echo of Carpenter's voice, even as the scissors continued their haunting rhythm. Jang-Yun jolted awake, his movements sharp and startled as he sat upright on the infirmary bed. Across the room, Rachel turned her gaze toward him, her posture calm and composed. Her expression carried a hint of warmth as she acknowledged his awakening. Jang-Yun's wide-eyed surprise was quickly replaced by a grimace as he became aware of the pain radiating from his earlier wound. His eyes dropped to his bandaged thigh, confusion flashing across his face as he processed the sight. The realization dawned on him, and he asked if Rachel had been the one to treat him. She confirmed, explaining that she had administered basic first aid and swapped his shredded clothing for Sion's gym attire. Her tone was gentle, almost nurturing, yet calculated. Jang-Yun, struggling to his feet, questioned her motives, his voice edged with suspicion. Rachel pulled a chair closer to him, her movements deliberate and poised, brushing off his harshness with an air of understanding. Her expression softened as she leaned slightly forward, her eyes glimmering with a tender look. She suggested that if he were willing to cooperate, there would be no need for hostility between them. Rachel crossed her legs elegantly, the faintest trace of a smile playing on her lips as she studied him. Inwardly, her thoughts veered toward her true intent. She had told Sion this would be an interrogation, but she knew better. Children like Jang-Yun, those who had grown up devoid of love or kindness, responded far more effectively to warmth than force. Her smile deepened as she moved closer to the bed, her tone light and disarming, as she asked if Jang-Yun would be willing to answer a few questions. Meanwhile, from a distant vantage point, a figure observed the scene through a monocular. His voice carried a thick Spanish accent, tinged with amusement, as he muttered to himself about Rachel's tactics. He remarked on her deliberate use of her beauty, noting with a mix of mockery and fascination that she knew exactly how to wield it. He laughed softly, predicting that Noel would not be pleased with Jang-Yoon for falling into her trap. Seated comfortably, the man adjusted his monocular, his black bomber jacket shifting slightly as he leaned forward. Black gloves covered his hands, and his attire, from his combat trousers to the sunglasses perched in his slicked-back black hair, exuded precision and authority. Around his neck hung a simple leather necklace with a square pendant that swayed slightly as he chuckled. Admiring Rachel's dark-haired disguise, he mused aloud that she looked stunning, his tone laced with playful intrigue. With a sly grin, he declared his intent to see her up close, calling out to her under his breath in a flirtatious tone, promising to meet her soon. In the sprawling school gymnasium, a cavernous space with its warehouse-like architecture, Jang-Yoon sat on the wooden benches, cheerfully biting into a pastry. His carefree expression masked the weight of his words as he mentioned that he couldn't reveal anything. Beside him, Rachel lounged casually, her demeanor calm yet calculating. Jang-Yoon continued, stating firmly that no matter how kind she was, his silence was non-negotiable. Rachel's response, cool and detached, probed deeper. Her casual question about his allegiance to Noel hung in the air, subtly pressuring him. Jang-Yoon hesitated, stammering slightly as he explained that he wasn't aligned with anyone, reiterating a deeply ingrained belief that he must always stand alone. Rachel, appearing disinterested, countered his statement, questioning his neutrality given his earlier fight with Sion. Her pointed remarks visibly unsettled Jang-Yoon, who looked away uncomfortably. He admitted that his cooperation with Noel stemmed from a shared goal. Noel had the information Jang-Yoon needed to find someone. Rachel's lips curled into a skeptical smile, her voice dripping with derision as she expressed doubt. She questioned whether Noel, a boy of the same age as Jang-Yoon, could truly possess such crucial information. With a mocking tone, she suggested that Jang-Yoon might be getting deceived. Jang-Yoon immediately rejected the idea, his conviction unwavering. He spoke passionately about Noel's vast network of eyes and ears, recounting how Noel had found him during his escape from someone he referred to as the real Uncle Carpenter. Rachel's interest piqued as she leaned in, her voice feigning curiosity as she pressed him to elaborate on the real Carpenter and why he had run. Internally, she mused at how easily children would spill their secrets when their pride was challenged. Jang-Yoon, undeterred, launched into his story, describing the rigorous training Carpenter had put him through and the hardships he endured before escaping. His vivid account included being relentlessly chased by a bespectacled figure until Noel discovered him during his time as a homeless runaway. Rachel offered him a drink, her gestures smooth and disarming, inwardly congratulating herself on her approach. She noted how seamlessly Jang-Yoon continued, oblivious to her calculated tactics. His words flowed freely as he explained that Noel had approached him with a proposition, a shared mission to liberate the good children of Dead Mansion who had been sold across the globe. Jang-Yoon spoke earnestly about Noel's dream of creating a family from these liberated children. But as Jang-Yoon's explanation reached its peak, Rachel's calm facade faltered. A spark of fury ignited in her eyes, her expression betraying her barely contained rage. Before she could respond, a smooth voice, laced with a Spanish accent, broke the tension from directly behind them. The interruption, sudden and precise, carried a mocking edge as the man chuckled, commenting on how much the little kid was talking. Rachel leapt backward, startled by the man's abrupt appearance. He exuded a casual confidence, sipping from the drink he had effortlessly taken from Jang-Yoon. His black bomber jacket and sleek, pulled-back hair completed his striking presence, his face framed by a thin mustache and stubble at the base of his chin. With a teasing smirk, he addressed Rachel, calling her señorita and remarking that it was their first meeting face-to-face. Lifting his sunglasses to reveal sharp, charismatic eyes, he introduced himself with a flourish. His name was Miguel. Miguel ascended the same row of benches with an effortless grace, his arm draping casually around Jang-Yoon's shoulders. His presence was disarming, his laughter light, as though they were old friends reunited. His words carried an air of ease, reassuring Jang-Yoon that there was no need for tension. They were allies, and he had come on Noel's orders to escort him. Rachel, however, froze, her expression betraying a rare shock. She stammered out a question, piecing together the possibility that this man could be that Miguel. The name alone carried weight, a near mythical status among mercenaries. Miguel turned his gaze to her, his movements fluid and deliberate, and replied with an almost dismissive nonchalance, acknowledging her recognition with a hint of amusement. He radiated a quiet confidence, the kind born from countless battles. Rachel's mind raced as she recalled the chilling legend whispered among mercenaries, a tale that blurred the line between man and myth. The saying resurfaced in her memory. If you see the matador waving his red capote, do not foolishly stomp and charge. The image was vivid. She remembered an incident, an account that had spread like wildfire through the underground. A gangster, armed and brash, leveling a gun at a shadowy figure cloaked in an air of inevitability. The figure held not a firearm, but a saber, its blade gleaming in the dim light. In her mind's eye, the scene played out. The matador flicked his red capote in a fluid motion, the fabric a stark warning. The gangster, undeterred, opened fire, but the shots rang futile. The matador had vanished, reappearing with inhuman speed behind the gangster. His movements were impossibly swift, the saber driving cleanly into his prey's back before the gangster could react. Blood erupted into the air like a grotesque plume as the matador stood triumphant, his posture poised and unshaken. With a flourish, he waved the capote again, its vibrant red now smeared with the spatter of his prey. The tale's ominous refrain echoed in Rachel's mind. The matador is always behind the prey. This ruthless specter of death was Antonio Miguel, known to the world as the Black Matador. Her vision of the tale ended with the gangster crumpling to the ground, his lifeblood pooling beneath him, while Miguel, proud and unhurried, claimed the stage. The legend was not exaggerated. Miguel's presence alone was a testament to its brutal truth. Miguel's casual demeanor betrayed nothing of his brutal nature as he dismissed Rachel's inquiry about his connection with Noel. He made a show of disdain for his nickname, claiming his love for animals and pointing out that bullfighting was now outlawed. Crossing his arms theatrically, he declared he had never been one to kill bulls anyway. But his tone shifted, chilling and sharp, as he cut through the air with his next words. Without warning, he vanished, reappearing behind Rachel with terrifying speed, a long spike in his hand, his voice a sinister whisper as he finished. The only thing he hunted now was humans. Rachel barely had time to react, her instincts pushing her forward just as Miguel's spike lashed out. The strike grazed her back, leaving a deep cut that burned as she skidded to a halt, now facing him. Miguel's cold amusement radiated from his calm smile as he observed her. She had dodged him, a rarity, one he found almost entertaining. Holding a small cylindrical device in his hand, he twisted it, and with a metallic snap, the device extended into a lethal spike. His grin widened, a predator savoring the moment before the kill. Jang Yun moved between them, spreading his arms in a desperate attempt to shield Rachel. His voice shook as he demanded answers from Miguel, questioning why he was even here. Miguel's reaction was dismissive, a mix of condescension and mockery. With a patronizing touch, he patted Jang Yun on the shoulder, his words almost soothing, promising the boy a future filled with beautiful women. Then, with a sudden, vicious movement, Miguel plunged the spike straight through Jang Yun's stomach. Jang Yun gasped, clutching at Miguel's hand in disbelief, blood pooling around the wound. He choked out a question, his voice ragged, but Miguel leaned in close, whispering a response laced with malice. Noel, he revealed, had sent a message. If Jang Yun showed even the slightest hint of betrayal, Miguel was to kill him. Miguel's grin widened, his words dripping with cruelty as he twisted the emotional knife, claiming that Noel found Jang Yun unsettling and untrustworthy. With a sickening sound, Miguel wrenched the spike free, letting Jang Yun collapse to the ground. Miguel offered a mocking bow, his voice light with false camaraderie as he bid farewell. But before he could savor his twisted victory, the sound of a gun cocking interrupted him. Rachel's voice cut through the air, her tone razor-sharp as she greeted him in turn. She pulled the trigger, the shot aimed to end him. But Miguel's reflexes were monstrous. He moved faster than the bullet, the shot grazing past him harmlessly. Before Rachel could fire again, Miguel hurled the spike with incredible precision, shattering her gun and disarming her in a single brutal move. The force sent fragments flying as Rachel leapt back, her posture defensive. Miguel yanked the spike from the ground, his movements fluid yet predatory, the weapon gleaming as he swung it with murderous intent. Each strike was a calculated blur, driving Rachel further back as she dodged, every motion reminding her of the impossibility of matching his relentless brutality. Miguel's spike grazed Rachel, tearing through her shirt to reveal a tightly laced black corset beneath, with a pistol strapped securely to her stomach. Rachel's lips curved into a smile as she seized the pistol, swiftly drawing it and firing several rounds at Miguel. Each shot, however, was met with inhuman agility as Miguel twisted and ducked, evading every bullet with ease. His laughter echoed in the gymnasium, carrying a tone of exhilaration, as if the fight had finally reached its peak. Rachel's smile faltered as her pistol jammed, the failure to eject an empty casing leaving her momentarily vulnerable. The frustration and tension were clear in her eyes. Miguel seized the opportunity, discarding one of his spikes without hesitation. With a feral leap, he closed the distance between them in an instant, his grin twisted as he mocked her misfortune. His attack narrowly missed, tearing her wig free instead. Holding the strands of hair in his hand, Miguel's smile widened, his voice dripping with satisfaction as he admired the fight she had put up so far. He lunged again, attempting to drive the remaining spike into her, but Rachel caught the weapon, gripping it tightly with both hands. Her growl of defiance met Miguel's taunting inquiry, his words daring her to end this struggle once and for all. As their locked bodies struggled, a subtle shift occurred behind them. Jang Yun, crumpled and seemingly lifeless, began to stir. Memories flooded his mind, a hazy recollection of Carpenter's lessons. As a child, Jang Yun had once asked Carpenter what he needed to become stronger. Carpenter, with a wicked grin, had patted Jang Yun's head, cryptically explaining that there was a skill only the real Carpenter could teach him. That lesson now burned in Jang Yun's mind as he rose unsteadily to his feet. Miguel's eyes widened in disbelief at the sight of Jang Yun standing, let alone moving. Bloodied and battered, Jang Yun's sheer vitality defied logic. Miguel's smirk vanished as Jang Yun disappeared from sight, his speed unlike anything Miguel had expected. Miguel, shocked, wondered aloud where Jang Yun could have disappeared. Jang Yun emerged from the shadows behind Miguel, his movements feral, his body a blur. With an animalistic snarl, he lunged at Miguel from behind. His arm, drawn back like the swipe of an animal, raked across Miguel's back in a devastating arc. The sheer force and precision of the attack tore through flesh, sending a spray of blood cascading into the air. Jang Yun's appearance was terrifying. His eyes glowed a lifeless white, devoid of humanity, while his face was obscured by dark, predatory shadows. Miguel stumbled forward, blood dripping from his mouth as he gasped in shock. The wound throbbed, and his mind raced to comprehend the strike that had bypassed his defenses. Jang Yun crouched low, his posture primal, the energy around him raw and unrestrained. This was the embodiment of the wild instinct, an untamed ferocity that radiated from every fiber of his being. Miguel, for the first time, realized he was no longer the predator.